President Mugabe under house arrest in Zimbabwe as the army takes control. Tanks are on the streets in the capital, Harare, as a despised dictator's 37-year rule appears to be over.
What the Zimbabwe Defense Forces is doing is to pacify a degenerating political, social, and economic situation in our country.
Also tonight,
this is the On TV Evening News with Mary Nightingale.
Good evening. Robert Mugabe, who for so long has ruled Zimbabwe with fear, violence and repression, is effectively a prisoner himself tonight after a military uprising. The army seized power overnight, putting the president under house arrest and taking over state television. A senior officer addressed the country, denying it was a coup, insisting they were only targeting criminals surrounding the president. It appears to be an attempt to stop Mugabe's wife, Grace, from succeeding the 93-year-old. From inside Zimbabwe, our correspondent Martin Geisler sends this report.
There is a new authority in Zimbabwe today, and it wears military fatigues. The generals say this is not a coup, but with soldiers on the streets in Harare and army hardware stationed at the junctions, it looks a lot like one.
We wish to make it abundantly clear that this is not a military takeover of government. What the Zimbabwe Defense Forces is doing is to pacify a degenerating political, social, and economic situation in our country, which, if not addressed, may result in a violent conflict.
The other message the military wanted to broadcast today was that President Robert Mugabe is safe. The man who's ruled Zimbabwe with an iron grip for nearly 40 years is now under house arrest, but evidently still able to contact his friends and allies abroad.
I have also contacted His Excellency President Mugabe, whom I had time to talk to, and he is fine but confined in his home.
Mugabe's government has turned this once rich country into a place where people queue outside the banks to collect enough cash to buy bread. Increasingly frail, the dictator wanted to hand the presidency to his wife, Grace, but the events of the past 24 hours could see Mugabe replaced instead by Emerson Mnangagwa, the deputy he sacked earlier this month. Long-standing Mugabe allies now speak out against him.
What Zimbabwe has been sliding into was a state of chaos. And for that reason, war veterans here do stand with the Zimbabwe Defense Forces.
As the armoured personnel carriers roll along Zimbabwe's roads, the military has called for calm, but nothing is certain here. Not yet.
The atmosphere in Harare is subdued. It's not oppressive, but it's certainly not celebratory. The people here are understandably cautious. They're just waiting and watching to see what happens next.
There was gunfire in Harare overnight, some elements of the security forces seemingly still loyal to the president, but many of the men who used to do his bidding are now trying to push this crippled country into a new era. Martin Geisler, ITV News, Harare.
Robert Mugabe will be remembered as a ruthless tyrant whose savage rule saw widespread murder, oppression and vote rigging. His dictatorship has been disastrous for Zimbabweans, with millions living in crippling poverty. Our former Africa correspondent, Rohit Khatri, one of the few Western journalists to interview Mugabe, looks back at his violent and brutal reign.
Inside Harare's State House, Robert Mugabe is tour guide around what feels like an imperial palace.
The piano, we had the piano for the kids.
This is his home and his office, and it's where he's under house arrest tonight. When I was invited in 4 years ago, the Commander-in-Chief seemed to believe he was invincible. Is there a number one regret in your 33 years in charge of Zimbabwe?
No, really. No regret. I don't have regrets at all.
Now his fate is even less certain than his country's.
I think the most important point to make is that everybody wants to see a stable and successful Zimbabwe, and I think we're really appealing for everybody to refrain from violence. That's the crucial thing.
He was once the youthful hero of the liberation movement and did more than anyone to force white Rhodesia to surrender. Lancaster House, 1979, an agreement to end 2 decades of violence and a promise of democracy. But his regime's ruthless edge began to show. Opponents slaughtered.
As long as dissidents come from a particular area, we will send troops to that area.
White farmers forced off their land. The economy collapsed. The old colonial masters were blamed.
We are not a British colony. You must know that. Tell him again. We are not a British colony. What have the British to do with Zimbabwe? Who are you? Tell him again. You bloody idiots.
He came to resemble the mirror image of Nelson Mandela, who he mourned at his memorial service with forced sincerity.
How are you feeling today? Overwhelmed with sorrow. Overwhelmed.
He is an anti-colonialist who, for now, still lives like an emperor. At 93 years old, his future, or what's left of it, is unknown. He once said only God could remove him. He might very soon be proven wrong. Rohit Katru, ITV News.
Okay, well, let's return now to Martin Geisler in Harare. Martin, so is this really then the end for Robert Mugabe?
It certainly looks that way, Mary. He is boxed into a corner that even he, the master manipulator, the master political tactician, will struggle to fight his way out of. His allies have been rounded up and arrested. His power base has been eroded. And you know, Mary, when we drove out of the airport today, the first thing we saw was a roadblock of soldiers, the troops smiling, waving us through. They're not under pressure. They've faced very little resistance. It seems now the dark days of the Mugabe regime are over. So what happens next? Emerson Mnangagwa, the deputy who he exiled just a couple of weeks ago, is back in the country. He says he'll speak to the Zimbabwean people tonight when he has, he'll speak to the Zimbabwean people when he has something conclusive to say. He hasn't put a time frame on that. All sorts of speculation as to what might happen now. Will there be free elections? Will there be a power sharing deal? Or will power just pass from one dictator, Mugabe, to another, Mnangagwa? The certainty, it seems, is that it will not pass to Grace Mugabe, his wife, and a great many Zimbabweans will be very happy at that. I think even the cynics, the pessimists who I spoke to today were thinking, whatever happens next, it can't be as bad as it was. There's a cautious optimism here in Harare tonight.
Okay, Martin Geisler in Harare, thank you.